My friends, we gather once again for another Living Hope Today study. I want to welcome you and thank you for being here one more time. Today, we find ourselves in Deuteronomy chapter 11. Now, you remember, I hope, that the book of Deuteronomy is basically Moses recounting the history of Israel to this second generation. The first generation that was brought out of Egypt through the miracle of God, who walked through the sea on dry ground, they doubted God. They would not enter the promised land. They thought those Anakites were too big, and so they held back. God said, okay, you can spend 40 years in the desert and die in the desert. You're not going to the promised land. But this second generation is now coming to the brink of entering the promised land, and Moses wants to make sure they remember exactly what God has done and what God has said. By the time we get to Deuteronomy 11, one thing that's really clear, and that is, life is about choices. We make choices every day. I mean, today you're going to choose what you decide to eat, and that's going to impact your health. You're going to decide whether you're going to exercise or not. Whatever choice you make is going to impact your musculature. All right, you're going to decide whether or not you're going to go to work today or not. Your choice could drastically impact your financial life. All right, our choices are ours to make, but they have consequences. And today in Deuteronomy 11, Moses is going to tell his people, and by extension tell us, what are the best choices, what are the worst choices, and what are the consequences. So simple, but yet so hard for us to really comprehend and follow. You get to verse 1, it says, love the Lord your God and keep his requirements, his decrees, his laws, and his commands. Always. What does God want us to do? He's commanding us to love him and keep his word. Right now, you and I have the choice. Are we going to apply ourselves to this kind of a verse and submit ourselves and say, okay, Lord, help me love you well. Help me do what I need to do to obey you in every aspect of my life. Or are we going to say, well, never mind, I don't want to. Verse 2, remember today that your children were not the ones who saw and experienced the discipline of the Lord your God, his majesty, his mighty hand, his outstretched arm. Okay, so you're raising a generation now, this would probably be the third generation since the Exodus, who have not had that experience of seeing God firsthand move like your parents and grandparents did. And here he says, keep his requirements. That's what he wants. Verse 3, the signs he performed and the things he did in the heart of Egypt, both to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his whole country, what he did to the Egyptian army, to its horses and chariots, how he overwhelmed them with the waters of the Red Sea as they were pursuing you, and how the Lord brought lasting ruin on them. Again, your kids don't know about this. They weren't there. But again, we recount the history. This is what God has done in his mighty strength and his power. He overcomes every obstacle. Verse 5, it was not your children who saw what he did for you in the desert until you arrived at this place. Okay, they don't have any experience in walking through the 40 years. What he did to Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab the Reubenite, when the earth opened its mouth right in the middle of all Israel and swallowed them up with their households, their tents, and every living thing that belonged to them. They have not experienced the judgment of God against wickedness as the previous generation has experienced. But it was your own eyes that saw all these great things the Lord has done. Observe, therefore, all the commands. Oh, here we go again. Make this choice. Do what God commands. Observe, therefore, all the commands I'm giving you today, so that you may have strength to go in and take over the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. Do what God wants. Hey, that's going to give you the strength you need to go where God wants you to go, and so that you may live long in the land that the Lord swore to your forefathers to give to them and their descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey. Hey, do what the Lord wants. Guess what? God's going to take you to a great place. Okay, so you can live long in that land. Okay, the land you are entering to take over is not like the land of Egypt from which you have come, where you planted your seed and irrigated it by foot as in a vegetable garden. No, but the land you are crossing the Jordan to take possession of is a land of mountains and valleys that drinks rain from heaven. It is a land the Lord your God cares for. Look at this. What's happening? We're being told that God himself cares for the land of Israel, the physical ground. The eyes of the Lord your God are continually on it from the beginning of the year to its end. He watches over the land of Israel, the promised land. So, if you faithfully obey the commands I am giving you today to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, notice in verse 13 that if. That's about a choice, isn't it? That implies a condition. There's a blessing here, but the blessing depends on meeting the condition. Don't meet the condition, don't get the blessing. Meet the condition, get the blessing. If you faithfully obey. What do you want me to do, God? Love the Lord your God. Oh, hasn't he already told us that? Oh, so now we have repetition in this chapter. And to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. In fact, since chapter 1, haven't we heard this over and over and over again? God's making his point so absolutely clear, it's unmistakable. Verse 14, you do that, if you meet that condition, what happens? Then I will send rain on your land. Oh, so God's the one that's in charge of sending rain on the land. God's going to do it if the condition is met. What's that symbolic of? The blessing of God. I'm going to send rain on your land in its season, both autumn and spring rain. So why? So that you may gather in your grain, new wine and oil. You're going to prosper in the place you live. I'll provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and you will eat and be satisfied. Be careful. Be careful. See, there's a lot of ways to make a choice that's not good. Excuse me. So what is God telling them here? Through Moses, he's saying, look, you better watch out. Yes, you're going to have all these blessings if you meet this condition. But if you stray, well, be careful or you're going to be enticed to turn away from and worship other gods and bow down to them. Again, you're going to be tempted to adopt the pagan practices of the cultures that you're displacing. Don't do that. Be careful. Here's a warning. Again, in modern times, you and I, we think about our lives. Are we careful not to adopt the ways of this world where everything's about the individual, where the individual has been elevated to God status, where, whatever I want is most important? We cannot be enticed by these things. Well, on to the 17th verse. Then the Lord's anger will burn against you. Oh, make the wrong choice. What happens? The Lord's anger will burn against you. And he will shut the heavens so that it will not rain, and the ground will yield no produce, and you will soon perish from the good land the Lord is giving you. God does not play favorites. It's up to you. You want to follow him, you want to obey him, you want to love him, you want to rejoice and do all that he asks. Hey, the door swings open. God's going to, not to say that you're going to have an easy life, but to say that you're in right relationship with the true and living God. What could be better than that? Moses says, hey, not only be careful and don't get enticed by those things, because there's terrible consequence awaits you if you do, but fix these words of mine in your hearts and minds, tie them as symbols on your hands, bind them on your foreheads. Don't forget this. How simple. how simple this command is. Just remember what I'm telling you. Do what God wants you to do. How many times does this poor Moses have to repeat this to these people? Teach them to your children. In other words, not just remember them, but pass them down to the next generation. Teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. In other words, all the time. Continue to communicate the goodness, the power, the strength, the grace, the mercy, the love of God all day long. And remember it yourself. Tell your kids about it. Write them on your door frame, on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. And we just opened this new sanctuary, right? What did we do? We went in and we wrote verses about who the Lord is all over this sanctuary. God is saying, remember, 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 so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land that the Lord swore to give your forefathers, as many as the days that the heavens are above the earth. In other words, God's blessing is going to extend well into the future if we simply do what he says. If you carefully observe all these commands I am giving you to follow. Well, there it is again. You see this? If. The condition. If. It's up to you. You want to live like God says? Perfect. God's going to respond to that. You want to reject God and live against what he says? Not good. God's going to respond to that too. If you carefully observe all these commands I'm giving you to follow, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, and to hold fast to him. Hold fast to him. I love that. Then the Lord will drive out all these nations before you. You will dispossess nations larger and stronger than you. Every place where you set your foot will be yours. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, from the Euphrates River to the western sea. Again, it's all about the if. Are you going to do it? It's up to you. No man will be able to stand against you. The Lord your God, as he promised you, will put the terror and fear of you on the whole land wherever you go. See, I am setting before you today. Oh, here now, let's just spell it all the way out, okay? You can have a blessing or you can experience God's curse. You can receive all the goodness that God has determined to pour out, or you can receive God's wrath, blessing or curse. It's up to you. This is the point Moses keeps making to these people. It's up to you. He pleads with them to go the right way, but if this, if that, right? Here it is again, the blessing if you obey. All right? Here comes the blessing if you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I'm giving you today. That's the condition. Just submit yourself to that. The curse, the curse, the curse. In other words, here it is again, the if. If you decide to say to yourself, I know more than God, I'm not going to believe that this is all real and that he means it and that he has the power to do it because I'm the master of my own ship. I get to do whatever I want to do. As Frank Sinatra sang so famously, I did it my way. I don't have to depend on God for anything. I can live however I want. If you disobey the commands of the Lord your God and turn away from that command, I command you today by following other gods, which you have not known. What happens then? When the Lord your God has brought you into the land you are entering to possess, you are to proclaim on Mount Gerizim the blessings and on Mount Ebal the curses. Tell them, and as you know, these mountains are across the Jordan, west of the road, toward the setting sun, near the great trees of Moreh, in the territory of those Canaanites living in the Arabah, in the vicinity of Gilgal. You are about to cross the Jordan to enter and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you. When you have taken it over and are living there, be sure that you obey all the decrees and all the laws I'm setting before you today. Choices. It's about choices. You and I can model the Israelites by wandering off like sheep to do whatever we want to do and put ourselves in peril line ourselves up in the direct bullseye of God's wrath, or we can examine His Word, come to Him by faith, and devote ourselves to Him. I'm not saying every day is going to be fun and just prosperous. This isn't a prosperity gospel like you're going to be guaranteed a nice life if you obey. Because I look at Jesus. Jesus had a very hard life. He was right where God wanted him to be, doing what God wanted him to do. I remember Ezekiel 24. God tells Ezekiel, I'm going to kill your wife today as an illustration, but don't cry. I mean, God can use our lives however He wants. And we can have really hard days from our perspective. But then again, God can bless amazingly well, beyond anything we could hope for, beyond anything we could think of. We as a church ought to know that best of all. So, it's up to you. What's your choice today? I pray you serve Him well. God bless you.
Who is it who for sinners shed His blood, and now for cleansing all can plunge beneath that flood? It's Jesus. But do you know who He is? He's the image of the invisible God, and He's the brightness of His glory, the first, the last, the future, the past.